Immigration was an issue in the United States throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. Immigrants were desperate, and their demand for work drove wages down, upsetting the middle class. People worried that immigrants would not assimilate, that they would hijack U.S. culture. With these fears in place, in November of 1918, when World War I ended and Americans were looking forward to times of peace and security, social tensions actually intensified. The end of the war led to a drop in wages for working-class people, and discontented with their pay, factory workers had all the more reason to detest immigrants, who might drive their pay down even further. This combined with the rise of radicalism and socialism at home, as well as abroad, caused strict repercussions for immigrants trying to enter the United States, especially those from Eastern Europe and Asia, where socialism was taking root. During wartime, there was a higher demand for many factory-produced goods, and to some degree, there was a higher demand for workers, as over 4 million men were shipped to Europe. This led to pay raises in industrial centers across the country. After the war, however, as demand decreased, so did the pay. This led to mass strikes and protests, including a nationwide steel plant strike, still considered one of the industry's worst, and a general strike in Seattle that shut the city down for days. Soup kitchens were set up to feed the protesters, but soon, people felt the weight of lost wages, and eventually were forced to return to work for lower wages. Their discontent at the strike's failures and lower wages led to contempt for anyone who threatened to cause any more reduction in their pay. As it turns out, this was mainly immigrants. At the same time as the strikes and protests in the early 1920s, the new communist Bolshevik Russian government called for a worldwide socialist revolution. In 1919, in Chicago and Washington, D.C., there was rioting in which stores were burned and people were killed. Much of this unrest came from the high number of unemployed veterans or from racial tensions, but many blamed it on foreigners and the evil ideals of communism. A communist party was organized in the United States, and its members called for the violent overthrow of the government. In fact, prejudice against new immigrants from Eastern Europe and Asia, as well as fears of radicalism and socialism, were so prevalent that there was talk of a possible Bolshevik revolution within the United States. As fear grew, the United States government began to take action. The New York State legislature expelled 5 elected members because they belonged to the Socialist Party, and anti-sedition bills that violated civil liberties were put in place. Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer had at least 5,000 people arrested at the time, many without a warrant, and he deported hundreds of immigrants. In 1921, in Braintree, Massachusetts, the Sacco and Vanzetti case led to the execution of 2 Italian immigrants accused of robbing a factory. There was very little evidence against them. In 1924, with public support, Congress passed the Immigration Act. This bill set specific quotas for the number of immigrants allowed to enter the country at a given time. It was especially harsh on Eastern and Southern Europeans, who were seen as more connected to socialism than the rest. The Immigration Act also banned Asian immigration completely.
Go.
Some spoke out against the Immigration Act, but the end of World War I and the rise of communism abroad made foreigners trying to move to and work in the United States look like enemies to many citizens.